I feel like I've come to the conclusion that women are not occupying the most visible roles of formal responsibility in the church because the kind of influence that they wield is too important, that the work of nurturing and caring is divine work, that it is where God wants to put us for a reason.
Oh, I watched this video and I thought, man, this is the best elevator pitch for the church I've ever heard.
Is there something better that I'm missing? Because these all sound like worthy, righteous things.
Can't keep quiet when you start a riot.
I guess my point there was, I was like, it's like you have to carry it like a secret. If you're a young woman right now who wants to be a mother.
Got our scripture notes up and running. All of the scriptural references used in this episode will be brought to you by scripturenotes.com. For a free trial to Scripture Notes, please visit the link in the description.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Women of WardRadio. I am Brittany the Shadow, and we have a stellar cast today. Charlotte, do you want to introduce our guest and introduce who's on the Zoom with you?
Yes, absolutely. On Zoom, we've got Joy Hansen, Tekla Fife, and Rachel Patterson of the awesome YouTube channel, Women and the Priesthood. Definitely check it out. And our special guest today is Meagan Kohler. She is a journalist who writes articles for Deseret News and also has a Twitter account. What is it? How can we follow you?
It's at Tresclare, Tresclare.
Ah, that sounds French. How fancy.
I was a French major.
Oh, that explains it. Awesome. So Meagan is a wife, mom, and writer. Like I said, she's a contributor at Deseret News, and she writes there about the intersection of culture and faith. She is a convert to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and she tries to share her perspective as a woman who has lived in and outside of the church. And so we brought you here today because of a little trail that I followed that I was reading in the Light and Truth letter about women, the section about women, the Light and Truth letter by Austin Fife, Tekla's husband. Page 138 is about women. And I was reading it in the car pickup line one day, and there's a section about all the research you found that supports how women being married to religious men is so good for them financially, economically, for education, for the poverty, the not as low poverty rate for their children, for their happiness, their strong families, their state of well-being. Like the list went on of the studies that you found that showed really in what seemed to me to show that the LDS Church is the greatest place for women. And this just blew my mind. I thought, wait, if government officials could read this, if social scientists could read what you found that shows how great the church is for women and how great it is for the men in their lives, wouldn't they all be begging every woman to join the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? It was such a cool revelation. So, Meagan, take it away. Tell us about your findings about women and religious men.
Well, so as you mentioned, some of it is it applies to religion more generally, and then some of it deals more specifically with our church. But one of the, so there are a number of things that social scientists know that put women at risk, and the church is really good at mitigating those. So one that I've talked about before, that I've written about before, is like domestic violence. It seems counterintuitive because that's not really the narrative that we get, in entertainment. But in fact, religious men are less likely to engage in domestic violence against their wives. So that's a big thing. But then, it's just a lot of factors. Strong families are important for a really wide variety of risk factors. Single mothers are, they're poorer, they have worse health, they have worse mental health outcomes. So there's that aspect to it. And there's even things like sexual satisfaction that tends to also be better among highly religious couples. So, yeah.
I love how your focus is on the.
I'm hard pressed to think of a single metric by which. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I think it was the sound. Keep going.
Oh no, I said I can't really think of a metric in which we know that religious women fare worse than non-religious.
So why do you think it is then that critics of religion and critics of our church get away with saying this over and over and over again, that religion is oppressive to women, that the church is oppressive to women? How are they getting away with that? Like, what? Are we just not being loud enough? Like,
I think a big part of it is the media, and entertainment. So movies, this is sort of a subtext of every Disney movie, is just that in order for me to be happy and fulfilled, I need to escape the constraints of institutions, and religion is a major one of those. I mean, think about how many movies you've seen in which there's a rigid, super patriarchal, figure who is oppressing someone or oppressing a woman. So I think when critics take these swings at the church, they don't need data to support it, because that's the standard narrative. So they're just sort of, they're just borrowing from that really strong cultural current. Whereas when you're in the church, you have to have data because it's countercultural.
Yeah, I was going to say it's more feelings, empirical evidence-based, where, right, someone's lived experience, that's all over social media.
Right.
Where, is it, if someone had a bad encounter with a man in the church, I believe that could happen, right? There's bad eggs everywhere. But is that your feeling towards that specific individual, or are you now generalizing it towards the church and the religion as a whole? And then also, I think sometimes women, once they're removed from a situation and they can look back, maybe the details are a little bit muddled, and maybe they're kind of creating a narrative because that's what they're being fed by anti-mos and ex-mos of, oh, it was really the patriarchy that did this to you. And then you start to believe that. I think that also happens quite more often than we like to think.
I couldn't have said it better. I mean, this is actually a studied phenomenon. This, like divorce narratives, for example, when someone is divorced and you ask them to go back and recount things, it's going to look a lot different after the divorce than it may be before, when they were trying to work on their marriage. Same thing with depression. I mean, that's basically what depression is it's filtering out positive information and honing in on what's bad. And so I think that's a really big part of it, honestly, is that people who are angry or aggrieved in some way are naturally going to select for the worst examples that they can think of, and they're going to filter out the good.
Yeah.
So I like what you said, Brittany, or was it Tikla? Someone saying, are we just not speaking loud enough? Those of us who are having great experiences in the church and with men in the church. And so I think this is a wonderful place where we can speak out and say, things are great. Things are great for women in the church. We're happy. We're fulfilled. We're educated. We're doing well financially. We're not getting abused or being treated like queens. We are respected. We're loved. We're thriving. So many of us. And for those of you who have had a hard experience, I'm so sorry. And those of you who hear those, that's the exception, not the rule. There are so many of us women who are so happy and so fulfilled and are so grateful for the church and all that it teaches and for what it does for the men in our lives. Meagan, you wrote in one of your articles how grateful you were that the men in the church aren't bosses. They're your brothers. They're your fathers that you needed so much in your life. Like, we need good men. Again, social studies show, like, people need fathers, at least father figures, and we have them here in the church.
Yeah, I would love to see more research on that. We have lots of research about fathers, but about how, like, positive male role models, how that help. We know that it helps boys, but as I mentioned in my article, I think that because of so many bad experiences that I had with men growing up, having my faith restored just I think in manhood was a really important part of my healing.
Well, and it's interesting. I think when we're talking about people's individual experiences that they now have decided or they, remember these negative experiences personally, having been in the church or whatever, I think there's also some blindness if you've been raised in the church to how good you had it. I have been blown away. I've had this happen several times, which I married a wonderful man. So, but I mean, he's just a regular guy. Like he's not, I don't know, but I've had women who have met my husband, interacted with him very little, and then said, my faith in men has been restored. And I think, you don't even know the half of it. He's even cooler than you realize. But it took so little to have their faith restored. And so I think we as Latter-day Saints take for granted how good we have it. And whereas you coming from a different background and coming and then joining the church have a better perspective of the contrast.
Yeah. Yeah. And, my perspective, I think, is a little bit unique because I think sometimes when people leave the church, they still remain surrounded by the effects of the church. So the men in their lives are mostly men that have been through lots of institutions, the church, higher education, the church used to do Boy Scouts, like all of these really important forums where their impulses are sort of channeled towards things that we consider productive and good as a society. But my childhood was spent really far away from that. It wasn't just that I didn't have the church. It's like we were really poor. We lived in a very rural area. It was kind of like the perfect storm of men just sort of having none of those formative controls placed on them. And so there's this really great quote by Louise Perry in a book that she wrote called The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, where she talks about freedom for the Pikes is death for the minnows. And that is, I couldn't really describe any better what women and children face in these places, which are all over around us in America, where men are lacking in any of these institutional constraints and any of these formative experiences. They are their impulses. There's nothing to check it, and women and children suffer most in those situations.
So it sounds like even like a lot of your articles really make the case that the church is the healthiest, happiest place for women in the world, but it's also a really powerful, happy, healthy place for men as well. Like it's the best place for our young men and our sons to also be raised and formed. And
yeah, and that's so important to me because I am a mom. I'm a boy mom. I have 4 sons.
So we've been talking about how it's so great for women because it's great for men. I want to talk about another way that the church is so great for women is its focus on education. I mean, how many of us have been to have college education? I think all of us, right? If not our full-on degrees that I know, at least Rachel's got a graduate degree in there. So that's 6 women here. It's a great slice of our population. We're very educated. The church has a huge emphasis on education. And when antis or people who have no idea about our church claim that we're this cult that is so oppressive to women, they force us to stay in home, like, have they even heard of Brigham Young University? I mean, Brigham Young University, Tikla, if you have the stats there about their graduation rates, if you could share those with us.
Yeah,
Tikla.
well, I just think it's so comical whenever, and I've talked about this before on the show, I think it's so comical that people think that you can encourage a woman to go get as much education as possible, give her every support possible to do that. And then after she's fully educated and she's independent and she has the whole world of possibilities opened up to her of what she could be and do. And then you say, oh, no, we actually want to force you to be home in a box and you have to be married and you have to have children. No. We are choosing it. We are choosing it because we are wise enough to look around at all of the options, the whole spread of what the world has to offer us and say, this is best. And then We do other things too. We do all kinds of wonderful things on the side, but focusing on that first, I think, is something that could not be forced because of the evidence we have. I mean, women are graduating at higher rates right now from BYU than the men are, which, whether or not that's a good thing, I mean, we could get into that another podcast. And so while you could point to the pay disparity in places that are heavily concentrated with Latter-day Saints, like in Utah, and note, men make far more on average than your average man, if you're a member of the church, and far less if you're a woman, you could see that as oppression, or you could see that as good men taking care of families and women who are now free to do whatever they deem important and needful in their communities and in their homes. And I think, so it's always so comical to me when people want to pretend that we've been forced into this life of servitude.
Yeah. I think that is so true. And I do think that some people maybe who grow up in the church and the church does emphasize, motherhood and family life for women. I can see how they would feel like they were influenced by their community to make those choices. But the truth is that all communities have norms. They all have expectations. And I was really grateful for the church's emphasis on family life because, growing up in the family that I did, it wasn't just a really intuitive thing to me that I would want to dedicate myself to family life. And it took a lot of faith, but I'm really glad that I did. It's been really healing.
I want to touch back on an idea that you mentioned before. You talked about the media and how it portrays us as so countercultural. It's almost like everybody's drinking the Kool-Aid, listening to Alyssa singing, no right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm going to go do my own thing because everything's oppressive. And so it really is like a total mind shift to realize, oh, you mean being a mom isn't oppressive? Oh, you mean like being a member of the church and being in a committed relationship isn't oppressive? Wow. This is like a huge aha moment for a lot of people that, might, and maybe they're losing hope. Like Tikla mentioned, maybe there's a lot of people losing hope that there are good men out there. Seeing all of the things in the media, they're just like, well, doesn't happen anymore. There's no more good ones left, but there are. I promise that there are.
Yeah. Well, and something that I've written about before is that we know, for instance, that the number of children that women desire and the numbers of children that they're actually having, that there's a really big gap there, the biggest that it's been in a long time. And so it kind of begs the question if we really have a pro-woman society when we see things like that. And
that's very interesting. So they want more than they're having.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's because of, their inability to find men that are committed, if it's financial, or I don't know, but that does seem sort of tragic. And I don't know, this idea that family life is just really constraining and burdensome. I mean, that's one way to tell the story, but I think when you look a little bit closer, you see that family life is something that women generally want. And so a church that embraces that and creates an environment where that's possible is honoring women.
There is a great chart in Light and Truth Letter, and you can pull it up. It's there in Discord. It's Women's Happiness by Marital Status and Children, age 18 to 55, by the General Social Survey 2022, so pretty recent. And if you look carefully at it, the happiest women are married with children. The second happiest children are married with no children, and then unmarried with no children, and then married with children. That would be very hard. That'd be very hard to be a single mom. So as you're saying, there is this desire, like women want to be married, they want to have kids, and when they are, the studies show they are happy. They're fulfilled. Yeah. I like what you talk about family life. So family life includes a lot of life skills, right? Cooking, cleaning, laundry, budgeting, time management. I was listening to our good old favorite Alyssa Grenfell's Brainwashed Mormon Mommies episode, and there's a large portion of it. She rips on the personal progress. You all went through personal progress before it was turned into the more general children and youth program with personal goal setting. So personal progress. So Alyssa Grenfell goes through all these horrible, oppressive. She keeps saying young women are trained to be mothers from a young age. They're trained to be mothers. It's instilled in them. They're brainwashed into wanting to be moms, wanting to have kids, and they can't do anything else. And so she shows part of the personal progress manual, and there's a part about virtue, reading all about virtue. And it says, in your journal, write the promised blessings of being sexually clean and pure and your commitment to be chaste. And so she's like, oh, this is so ridiculous. I mean, she just mocks this. And any social worker, any teacher, anyone who's in any position to help in society would say, actually, yes, being not promiscuous, whatever that word is, being chaste and being good and being careful sexually is smart, is wise. Like, be good to our society, please, and be careful who you sleep with. Like, bring children in this world carefully. And also, even if there aren't children as a result, like, it's a very emotional, difficult thing for anybody. So that's one thing where it's like, wait, this isn't a stupid Mormon brainwashing thing. Like, this helps all of society.
Idea. Yeah. Oh, I watched this video and I thought, man, this is the best elevator pitch for the church I've ever heard.
Yes,
anyone. Well, and the women. I'm too. Let me say it like this.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean, are we going to go further into that? Because I have a kind of a switch.
Well, let me just share the other two screenshots. She says, then she brings up another personal progress thing that says, learn a new skill or talent that will help you care for your own future family or home. For example, playing the piano, singing, budgeting, time management, cooking, sewing, or childcare. And so I volunteer at a shelter in my town, and in the shelter are single people, whole families, large families, small families who have no home, no job, and are at rock bottom. And what do they teach them at this place? Cooking, cleaning, budgeting, time management skills, being faithful to your spouse, not having drug addictions. All these things that they are teaching these families who have messed up their lives most of them had no idea. They didn't know better. They were never taught. All these skills that they're teaching to these struggling adults and struggling families, we are teaching to our youth, to our young men, to our young women. And so when I hear Anti say, oh, you're training all your youth to be moms and dads, I just want to say, you're welcome, world. You're welcome for making very great humans in your land.
What would you rather have us do, Alyssa? Should we rather be practicing the latest video game? That's really going to help us go far in life. I don't know, what's the alternative here? Is there something better that I'm missing? Because these all sound like worthy, righteous things to pursue.
Well, and I want to see Alyssa Grenfell's strongly worded letter to play school, because she should really be going after baby doll companies, because that's just brainwashing the entire world's population of girls. Why would you ever have a baby doll?
Well, and so I want to get your opinion on this, Meagan. I think so much of this to me feels, so much of the criticism leveled at the church on this topic feels like it's downstream from feminism.
Yeah.
And so I'd be curious some of your thoughts on that and how you see that playing out. Because from what seems to me like a high resolution concept in feminism that's trickled down, maybe even a little bit late to Latter-day Saint women, who are now embracing it in a way that's kind of behind the times. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I have so many, but I love the way that you express that. I personally, when I look at some of the things that modern feminism has done for women, it's hard for me to think of how they could have done any better than the most misogynistic man to curtail women's flourishing. I mean, I'm not trying to be flippant.
That's an amazing,
but I just the sexual revolution, the idea that we should socially engineer women to engage with sex as casually as men do. Was that really for women? I don't think so. I mean, that to me seems to suit the interests of the worst men much more than it suits the interests of women. Yeah. I know this isn't the episode, but I am, I'm so strongly opposed to abortion for a number of reasons, but one of them is that it is so anti-woman. The idea that we're going to penalize women for meeting the excess sexual desires of men by hauling them off into some sterile room and cutting their growing child from their womb is disgustingly anti-feminine. It's anti-woman. That's not what women want. That's what the media tells women is what they want, but it's not what they really want. I just think that in so many ways, feminism got off track because it assumed that the only way for women to have equality was for them to assume the characteristics and the roles of men, rather than asking and being really sincere about asking what drives women. What do women care about? What do women's instincts and talents, drive them towards? And then helping women to accomplish those things. I think that there are a lot of women who are waking up to this, but I think you're right that it seems to not have trickled down so much to women in the church.
Yeah, it almost feels like they're not seeing the negative effects of the experiment because they are in these traditional communities and families. And so because they're not seeing those negative effects so starkly in their face, they have the luxury of assuming this is still a working experiment.
Exactly.
And if they could just like move somewhere else for a minute or go on a mission or just read some of the latest literature on this topic, I think it would be really eye-opening for some of these women to realize, oh, I'm actually really behind the times on this. And I'm making myself look foolish by advocating for some of these things now that we're moving beyond that. I know you mentioned Louise Perry, who you actually remind me a lot of her, by the way.
I love her.
Very feminine, very lovely and great, super intelligent. And then also Mary Harrington. Yeah. They're both kind of doing something right now that I think all Latter-day Saint women should go and look into, both of these women and some of the work that they're doing, because they're kind of trying to reclaim feminism a little bit. Like, I know I, for my part, have almost given up on it completely. Like, I don't know if it's redeemable, but they're giving it a good effort. And because by definition, feminism should be femininityism, and that's not what it's become. But if we reclaim it, then we have things like Mary Harrington's Feminism Against Progress and Louise Perry's, what's her Sexual Revolution book? Good stuff. So just a little shout out. Everybody go look into those two people who have great things to say.
Yeah, and I just had a thought.
Another voice I would mention is Erica Bakioki. She's a Catholic legal scholar and has written a lot about where feminism sort of got off the wrong track, got on the wrong track. And she talks about a care-based feminism, which I think is such a beautiful concept, because I do think that women care. It's just a part of our nature. And I think trying to act like the work of care is you get this feeling that women who like those things are silly. They're less serious than women who want to, pursue STEM careers. Any kinds of traditional female pursuits are just viewed as being stupid. And I don't think that that's pro-woman. I think that that's pro-man. I think that that's telling women that if they want to be taken seriously, well, here are the range of of subjects you're allowed to be interested in. Here are the kinds of pursuits you're allowed to undertake, and then we'll take you seriously.
I think to reinforce your story, I actually discovered that those ideas had really started permeating our culture as a church when I was Young Women's President 2 years ago, and I was in charge of the seniors, and they were all awesome girls from great families. And, you know, we talked about applying for colleges, the next plans. And then I was like, do any of you, I knew all of them were very excited to be moms. And I said, do any of you feel like you could tell your friends or, you know, guidance counselors at school that you want to be a mom? And they all looked at me like horror. They were like, oh, no, we would never tell, even though they wanted that, and they would tell each other, which was the benefit of having Young Women's, is that they could admit to each other. I guess my point there was, I was like, it's like you have to carry it like a secret if you're a young woman right now who wants to be a mother. And I know that there's a kind of, you know, traditional backlash happening, but what I see happening is that it's happening with girls who have experienced the pain of feminism and liberalism already, and they realized how painful it is and it doesn't work, and now they're becoming traditional. I met a girl in grad school who found out I was LDS and was like, oh, I've been practicing being celibate for a year. And I was like, why? And she was like, because I just felt like I was being sexually active made me vulnerable to being used. And so I wanted to kind of like reclaim myself and then go and be in good relationships. So I didn't know if you had any insights on the way that our young women in the church, how we have to protect their ability to have those desires, or anything you had on comment on that.
So I don't know that I have a lot of pro tips, you know, on how to deal with this. It's something that I have noticed as well. And I think that you kind of hit on something that I think is important, that there is sort of like this backlash and you know, like there's the trad wife movement and stuff. And I think there's some really great things about it, but I do worry sometimes about putting pressure on women to think that if they want to have a family life, that it has to look like wearing prairie dresses, you know? And we have all been moms long enough to know how really messy and imperfect it is. But I think that there's like these two messages out there. Either it's impossibly difficult, right? Because you have to make your own cheese or something, or, you know, a life without children is more dignified and allows you to pursue your interests better. So what I try to do, you know, I'm in the Young Women's Presidency right now in my ward, is I just try to model, I guess, the kind of happiness that I have as a woman in the church. You know, I get to write for the Deseret News, but I also get to pursue, you know, being a stay-at-home mom. I have all of these wonderful choices. I am fulfilled spiritually and physically and emotionally. And I just try to show them that this is a happy path, and it's not something that you have to be weird about. It doesn't have to be weird. But you know, you can embrace this life, and you know, it's you don't have to become a handmaiden to do it.
Yeah, well, and apparently religious men do more chores, they change more diapers, they are more helpful around the house. And so I think the model that incorporates everyone into the family work.
Yes.
You know, it's so interesting to me how new the like traditional mom stays home and does nothing but the child care. Even my association with nothing in childcare, whoops. No, but stays home and does the childcare and the cleaning, and the dad leaves the home to go do things, is a very new phenomenon. Like originally it would have been family work where everyone's working at home. Dad's doing things in the field or the farm, and mom's doing things in the home, but they're both at home. And I think in so many ways, we have the luxury of reclaiming some of that as technology kind of allows for women's voices to be heard more, and even work from home options that I think allow us to do what we ultimately want most, which is to be with our children, but also have all of these other outlets and all of these other things that we can do and contribute to our communities and things like that. And it's very exciting.
I love that. I just completely agree. And I like, yes, this idea that, embracing motherhood means embracing these really rigid, super traditional roles. Yeah, like I love how you pointed out how that's kind of a relatively recent thing, and that as technology changes, we're kind of maybe finding more balance on that. I did want to kind of go back to one thing that you mentioned, Tikla, about how I think sometimes there's like maybe a subset of the population, men and women, who are sort of isolated from the downstream effects of like the sexual revolution, and how that can kind of create some blind spots. And from what I can tell, it seems to be a very class thing, like, people who grew up in upper middle class or whose parents were professionals, have a lot of the stability that results from family life and all of the social capital that generates for them. And whereas on the other hand, among the working class, we can see just how devastating the loosening up of sexual mores has been, and how that has particularly affected women. And that's kind of what I have tried to shine a light on in some of my articles, that this idea that the church's emphasis on chastity for both men and women, it's not something that's just for women. It's definitely taught to men. How that translates to the most vulnerable, the poorest and women and children, I think is tremendous. It's so empowering for women. It's so freeing for them. Women, especially poor women, are so often tied to the bad choices of men. They don't have the social capital. They don't have the educational resources to be otherwise. And so having a church that focuses so much on forming men to be responsible and caring has a really big impact on all women, but especially on the poor.
I was going to say,
it makes you want to say to critics of the church, leave your little suburban town, go to an inner city, go to a third world country, and see how the church is really changing lives and really blessing them.
Yeah.
Well, and one of my things I'm so grateful to the church for is that even in spite of the throngs of women within our own ranks who have begged for the church to change the way that it operates to a way that assumes that men and women's needs are the same. And these are men who would do anything for the women of the church, who would do anything. They would lay down their lives for their women. And so the fact that they didn't listen, that they haven't listened to the women who are crying so loud for this, to me is an indication that this is a divinely run institution, the divinely run church of God that knows to value motherhood and womanhood and femininity, even if our own women don't. And so I am so grateful that the men of our church who lead us, who are listening to someone higher than all of the people who have a lot of things to say, because as a result of that, now that I have come to the place where I have found myself so alone in valuing my role as a mother, when I go around and the fact that I have a baby attached to me now makes me less than, I still have a place to go where I am valued and what I'm doing is valued. And I know so many disenfranchised members of the church will say that we pedestal motherhood, that we somehow like oversell it, we overglorify it. And I just have to say, well, we're the only ones who know the truth that motherhood is a high and holy calling. And if they're not going to say it, no one else is.
I was kind of thinking along those lines today. I was thinking about.
I wanted to say too that Oh, sorry. I think it lagged and I didn't hear you. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. You're good. I was pondering on that today, thinking about how when we think of the church, we think of, this little brown building, bishop sitting up on the stand. Sometimes we think about general conference and the general authorities. But the church is so much more than that. The church is the members, and the church is our homes. That's why it's home-centered, church-supported. The church is all of us. And to say that, it's great for men because they have all these leadership roles in the church, is like, when was the last time you went in somebody's home and realized how much mom had the leadership roles? And the mom decides how things run kind of and obviously it's different in every home, but it just kind of baffles me that we are so confined to thinking of church and priesthood and leadership and organization in this tiny little box. And we're like, no. It's everybody. It's every member of the church. We are the church.
Thanks, Joy. Meagan, do you have anything else to say to close off this discussion?
I think I would just end by saying that, one of the things that kind of started me on this path was that, I had just so many really powerful spiritual experiences that confirmed to me that the church was a divine institution, and that that I didn't need to be, that experience kept me, I think, from adopting a more cynical view of why the church is structured the way that it is. And so it led me to try to understand it, and to take off those kind of cynical lenses, that prism of power that the world hands us for trying to understand the church, and to try to look at it differently. And I feel like I've come to the conclusion that women are not occupying the most visible roles of formal responsibility in the church, because the kind of influence that they wield is too important, that the work of nurturing and caring is divine work, that it is where God wants to put us for a reason. And that the idea that being in those priesthood roles of responsibility is where the power and influence happen it's not just against the scriptures, it's against our doctrine. If you look at what is going on and who makes the differences in our church, you will see that it contradicts experience as well. I really have just come to feel that the work that I do in nurturing my children, in caring for other people, in trying to love them in as much of a personal manner as I can, that changes the world, that makes the difference. And, if I'd gone to law school and if I'd worked as a fancy attorney, I'm sure I could have touched lives, but I don't think that it would have made me any more qualified to make significant change in the world or other people's lives than the work that I do as a member of the church.
Meagan, thank you so much. That was so profound and so beautiful. I know all of us are just nodding and amening everything. Thank you so much. If you'd like to read more of what Meagan has written, you can go to DeseretNews.com and look for her, Meagan Kohler. All her articles are just listed right under her bio there. And you can follow her on Twitter at Tresclare, Tresclare. And thank you so much for listening today. Hurrah for women and mothers, woohoo! And for this and more, you can look at WardRadio.com.
Can't keep quiet when you start a riot.
Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. We assume if you made it this far that you liked our content, so please make sure you like this video and you share it with your friends. Now, in order to keep this content flowing freely, we need your help. If you're a person of means, please check us out on Venmo, the Cash App, or Zelle, and consider a direct contribution to the channel. Or you could always go to WardRadio.com and sign up for our newsletter there and receive all of our latest Ward Radio news articles directly to your inbox. And while you're there, maybe consider purchasing some merch. We have some really cool hats, some really cool shirts, so you can strut your stuff and support the channel that way. Or if you're a kind of person that wants to just help out with some of the equipment in the studio, we have an Amazon wish list linked in the description as well. And don't forget scripturenotes.com. You have to read your scriptures daily, and scripturenotes.com is frankly the coolest way to study your scriptures, and they're a very generous sponsor of this channel. So please consider a free trial with scripturenotes.com. The link to Scripture Notes will also be in the description of this video. Either way, whether you're pressing this little button right here to subscribe to our channel and share it with your friends, or whether you are actually hitting this button right here just to watch another video, we look forward to seeing you in the next program.